Hello there, and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. And today, let's talk about it. Once again, we're back on the ending issue, and it's because of the new casting of Supergirl. Now, I already did a video about Sasha Cali, being cast as Supergirl. And funnily enough, I didn't even mention race because she's a Latina, but I didn't even mention race because I didn't think it was important, which was very, very weird. And so, the normal crowd on YouTube doing the, this character being race bent. And it seems kind of bizarre to me. In this case, you're talking about different types of Caucasian women playing, a character who hasn't even really been established, particularly that she's anything except Caucasian. It doesn't say whether she's fairer skinned, lighter skinned. She has been depicted mainly as fairer skinned ever since her first appearance in DC Comics, but nonetheless, I mean, it's not an established tenet of her character. But I guess in there lies the problem. So I want to talk about this because it's been an issue for me for a while as somebody who is both for race bending in certain situations and against it where it doesn't make sense. So I want to go to a YouTuber. I really, really like her, actually, and we've had a bit of back and forth sometimes. She's always just a really clever girl or young lady, pardon me, or woman, that always just makes really, really good points. I don't think we agree on the same things politically, but she always expresses herself very clearly and concisely and openly. And is always open to feedback. So I appreciate that about her. But this is, I guess it's Tristan Rigg from, it's Nerdette's Newsstand, the YouTube channel. And I just listened to some of her reasons about race bending and, why she thinks it happens, and then whether she thinks it's okay or not. So let's go into it.
They are. You can't change them. And I feel like a lot of times it's changed for a few reasons, right? There's only really 3 reasons why franchises like DC or Marvel will race swap characters. 1, so it can fit their liking. 2, so it can fit their social agenda, or both. The majority of Hollywood is unfortunately oblivious to the idea that adapting and staying true to the original source material is a sure way to guarantee moviegoers or, HBO Max subscribers, whichever you wish. And the reason these characters have lasted for so long is because they are beloved. Now, I'm only bringing this up for 2 reasons. We have 1 rumor and 1 confirmed of new castings when it comes to DC Comics. Now, I know people are going to be in the comments saying, well, a lot of characters from DC are primarily white. They want representation. They want more diversity. And that's great. But DC has 10,000 characters. Yeah, it's a lot. They have 10,000 characters to choose from when telling a story. The reason they choose names like Constantine or Supergirl is because they are money makers. And without giving the real characters like Bumblebee or Black Lightning a actual platform, you will never get these amazing characters front and center. And then when you do give them a platform, specifically talking about Nubia here, you have something come out like The Real One, where it is all about how society doesn't see Nubia as a person because she is Black. Yes, that is real, and it comes out next week. I will be reviewing it. Now, all of these things can work and DC found out a way to do it. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. But before we get into that, make sure you are subscribed. As always, hit that like button. Let me know down below what you think of the 2 castings I'm going to be talking about and what you think of the ideas behind the Flashpoint paradox that we will be getting from DC Comics. Now, first, let's talk about HBO Max. We have been promised J.J. Abrams would be working on some League type stuff. Now, we are getting new reports that the Constantine HBO Max show is going to recast the character. This will be coming from J.J. Abrams. We will not be seeing Matt Ryan, who plays Constantine and is widely loved for that character when it comes to the CW. We will not be seeing Matt Ryan at all. We will not be seeing a British actor at all. They are looking for a BIP, the BIPOC character, a Black Indigenous person of color. Okay. Are they going to be British? Are they going to be blonde? They're talking about a Riza Ahmed type character. Again, ask you the same, same question. Are they going to be British? Are they going to be blonde? Are they going to say, oh, bloody hell? I have to hear him say.
Okay, so I wanted to stop here because Riz Ahmed is one of my, I think I've got basically all of her points down. Again, this is one of these kind of areas where I disagree with her. I do agree that, sometimes race bending is done for the wrong reason, and it's done for cynical kind of reasons where it's just trying to, I wouldn't say it's like forced representation, but I think it does a disrespect to the character and to the intelligence of the audience when you suggest things like, oh, let's make Superman black, or let's make Batman black. And I'm going to go into the Superman being black thing in a minute, because often the retort to that is Superman's an alien, so if he's an alien, he could be anything. And it's just like, read a fucking comic, guys. There's some very basic reasons why logistically Superman being black is very unrealistic. But anyway, we'll talk about that. But as far as somebody like Constantine goes, now Constantine is a great example of a character where I don't think there is anything that and please correct me in the comment section, like and subscribe and connect and do tell me in the comment section if I'm right or wrong about this. But I don't think there's anything about Constantine that has established why he must be a certain race. The comics at all. I really don't. I have no, clue of, is there something about him? Does he come from a certain background or family or whatever that necessitates that he be white? But I wanted to put this out because the first thing I thought is, does Riz Ahmed have blonde hair? And of course, I'm a big fan of Riz Ahmed, and as you can see here, him sporting very much blonde hair. And of course, she asked the other question, because I don't know, Americans seem to feel that all British people are white, and maybe they speak like the Queen or speak a bit of Cockney. I'm doing Australian right now, but they're quite Cockney in it, and I'm still doing fucking Australian. But anyway. They either think we speak like this or that, like the Beatles or something, or the Queen, and we're all white, and it's a very strange misconception. So I just thought, how bizarre. I can't think of anybody more British and more in the line of the way, he's almost one, Riz Ahmed is a fantastic actor, but secondly, even beyond that, You know, if you listen to how he speaks, you know, you'll realize he's as well, he's not as cockney as Mutt, but he's very, very British, you know, up with the slang kind of guy. So it's very bizarre to me. I don't know if he's going to put on airs. I'm probably going to get like, he's going to put up on airs in this these interviews and sound much more you know, posh than he usually does. But let's hope that he doesn't.
To kick these off, because this is primarily an audience of SAG-AFTRA actors, by asking about your SAG card. But the last time I asked you, you weren't quite sure which film it was. So I actually want to ask another question, which was, when did you know you wanted to be an actor? Was there a defining moment? Were you someone?
He's such a great actor as well. I'd love to see him play.
I'm definitely someone who grew up imitating and acting out movies that I've seen. The problem was that all the early movies that I saw were kind of ones that I saw through a crack in a door while my uncles were watching things like Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
So they were quite gruesome. I remember some early them.
Yeah. So basically, this is Riz Ahmed. Basically, he is like, as I suspected, he's trying to sound quite, you know, well spoken. And he is obviously, he's an intelligent guy and he's well spoken. But I'm telling you, this guy is like street. This guy is up street. All right, let me see when because he does these raps. Let me see if he speaks more ghetto when he's. You can see him here. He's like a ghetto kind of fucking kid, you know, who's just happens to be a really fucking good actor. He was even in a film where he was just playing like this really fucking cockney guy. And you can see the really interesting face bending of you know, in a way, this is where he lives.
This is England, which we're living in. A kitchen simmering, women in hijabs, syringe pop star, promise of a patel as a man you star with a you can the man you are, stand opposite, so we drink too hard. The banks rob you, and the news is half the truth. Tapping boobs.
Okay, so here we go. The point I'm trying to make here, very, you know, like with Riz Ahmed, I should have looked up an interview first. But the point I'm trying to make here with Riz Ahmed is you can't get anybody more street British than him. And if that's what Constantine is, he's like Cockney, which is not something that is spoken as much anymore in the UK. We've more moved on to rude boy. So the modern Constantine would much more likely be rude boy. And that's what Riz Ahmed is. And that would be an interesting update to such a character without, you know, taking away what's core to the character, which is he's kind of like, he's edgy, he's from the streets, he's streetwise, he's street smart, he's quick talking. So that is exactly, I think, would be perfect for Riz Ahmed. And I hope, you know, and the blonde hair, I mean, it's like, have you heard of hair dye? You can see right here that, again, absolutely, he would be, you know, a perfect actor. And to be honest, to be very fair, I mean, they could go with him actually being Asian, and that would be actually nice, representing him as Asian. But he could just as easily be a dark Caucasian person. He could be acting as a dark Caucasian person just as easily as he could be an Asian person. I've seen him in movies where he is not playing an Asian. He is playing like basically, he was in that movie, he was really fantastic in it with Jake Gyllenhaal called Night Stalker, or not, Nightcrawler. And I'm pretty sure he's playing a white guy, like in that movie. I'm not like he's playing a white surfer dude. So again, you know, I think we have to be careful, you know, with the assumptions, because really what she's saying is she's looking at a brown person and she's judging them simply off of appearance and not seeing what they might be capable of. And a character like Constantine, I'm sorry, is not the type of character that you kick up a fuss if he's turned black, if he's turned white, if he's turned ginger, if he's, because the core of the character, nothing is tied to that character that makes them racially have to be white. Now, would I say about this, race swap? What's the reason for it? Let's dig into the reason for it, because if you dig into the reason for it, you might be able to anticipate the quality of the movie. Now, if you dig into the reason for it and, they're just looking for the best actor and, Riz Ahmed comes up and he smashes the casting and even makes them think of the character in a new direction, then you can be rest assured that you're probably looking at a good movie. Or somebody who's doing it without cynical reasons. If the reason is that they want to race bend because they want to bring out another aspect of the character, maybe they want to connect Constantine's mystical abilities and magic knowledge with a past in the mystical Asia or Orient or whatever. And they're thinking, okay, what about a British Asian guy to take on that role, to give a new dimension to how you can look at Constantine? Because we've seen him as the British Cockney guy over and over again. Let's have a different dimension to him. Then again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad reason to cast an Asian. Now, if you're just casting an Asian because you're like, oh, we need to fill a quota to how many blacks and Asians we have in this movie, then I think you might run into trouble with the writing. Then I think you might run into trouble with, the quote unquote woke agenda behind it, and the messaging. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but then you get the thick layer of, very, very unsubtle messaging that kind of ruins the movie for you. It's just like when you're hammering a point home, it very much can take you out of the movie. If it's done subtly, like in The Dark Knight, where they have political messages, or in Wonder Woman, they have a few political messages. Even in Iron Man, certain other movies, they have political messages, but the story is more important than the message. Whereas in Batwoman, clearly, the message is what's, most of those CW shows nowadays, it's the message. It's feminist. Oh, it's this. That is more important than the story. It's the message guiding the story. And that's where I think these things become very, very misguided. Now, I want to talk over a few characters because I want to talk in categories. So the first thing, because people seem to have a problem with race bending across the board, right? And I think there's a few different categories of race bending, in the superhero genre. I'm not going to talk about other genres, where, I think it's completely appropriate. Somewhere I think it's sometimes appropriate, and sometimes somewhere I think, it's kind of more mixed. So I'm going to break it down as superheroes, villains, and supporting characters. And I'm going to talk about the uncanny, for some reason, need of Hollywood to, I don't know what they have against ginger people, ginger white people, but like blacks are straight up snatching their roles, like mixed race and black people are straight up snatching ginger people's roles. I don't know why ginger is so offensive to so many Hollywood people, but every time you have a ginger character, you can be guaranteed that they will be race bent. And I'm going to go into that and see what the weirdness is in that. But first of all, let's talk about supporting characters. Now, supporting characters to me, I've looked at James Gordon. James Gordon has recently been obviously race bended. And now he's black in the latest Batman movie. He's being played by a phenomenal actor, Jeffrey Wright, who's absolutely incredible. And, quite frankly, it would be, I think, fantastic in the role and would give us a very new detective noir style of Gordon that we haven't quite seen before in the Batman films. Now, the reason I bring up James Gordon is because there's a whole group of characters in in superhero mythology called the supporting characters. You've got characters like Jimmy Olsen, you've got characters like Lois Lane, you've got characters like Steve Trevor for Wonder Woman. There's a number of different characters that are around the main character. Now, these I bring up because I don't think anybody should ever have any problem with them being race bent. Now, we have to take a slight detour back into the history of when comics were actually invented, obviously. So the first comic, I believe, was Superman, and I think it was 1938 that he came out. Now, in this time, when you're looking at race bending and you're saying, well, there's 10,000 DC Comics characters, and why do you have to change, like these characters? Why don't you use Bumblebee or use, somebody else as a character, who's already black? Why change the main characters like James Gordon, who's always been white? And they have this fan base, and this fan base, likes comic accuracy. And it's like, to me, I think that is one, not looking at this in a historical context, right? So, for instance, let's look at James Gordon. His first appearance was in Detective Comics, May 1939. Okay. Now, in that time, I think you would find it rare to find any black person or Asian person in comic books that wasn't, in fact, some kind of horrible caricature of that race, like whether it be blacks or whether it be Asians. So it took a very, very long time before I think even comic creators were comfortable with making black characters. And obviously, if you have, it's just like in life, it's like each of these characters have a certain currency in terms of what they will do for a black actor or an Asian actor's career as a franchise. If you're going to gamble on it, sometimes, new characters, you just have a gamble like Jason Bourne and boom, it's a massive franchise already, straight off the bat. But other characters are more tricky, with females and colors of actors, characters, actors of color. When you're thinking about taking on a franchise, whether it be, a comic book or an IP that's already existing or anything like that, you probably, if you want your career to take off, you probably want to take on a character that has some history, that has some recognizability. I mean, even look at characters who do have history and they still fail and they have brilliant movies, like Dredd. Dredd is a perfect example of a movie that was excellent, absolutely excellent, with an IP that I would say is quite a strong IP. Dredd was certainly more known than, I don't know, Iron Man before he came out, and it absolutely did nothing in the box office. It staggered in the box office. So the point I'm trying to make is, when you have characters with a great deal of history, whose stories kind of write themselves, they have so many stories you can draw on and all of this kind of thing, they become much more attractive for young actors to take on. And to say that these kind of roles, where you have the big, the Supermans, the Batmans, the Wonder Womans, the Thors, the Iron Mans, these big characters, and all of their supporting casts are white in the comics, all of their villains are white in the comics, right? That no black or Asian person can take over any of the roles in those movies. I mean, come on. this is basically, it's putting a barrier to the success of actors of color. These are the main IPs, the biggest shows in town, the films that everybody goes to and flocks to these days, whether it be Star Wars, whether it be something like the comic book movies, all of these kind of things, these massive IPs that have historically existed for a long time. If you said every character that started off one race has to remain that race, you're talking about a racist policy, essentially. I'm not saying that a character like James Bond should be race bent, because I don't think that makes sense, or changed into a woman. James Bond as a woman doesn't make sense, right? But when it's Jason Bourne, if you wanted to do a reboot of Jason Bourne without Matt Damon, why not have a black? There's nothing about that character that says he has to be white. And in fact, in the case of Jason Bourne, certainly if you make him a black actor, you can add more dimensions to Jason Bourne that weren't even explored in the previous movies. So you can actually make it more interesting. But going back to the point of supporting characters are the most fluid of all the categories, superheroes and villains, where it really doesn't matter a lot of the time their race. There's very, very few supporting characters in comics because usually they don't have an origin of their own. Their origin depends on the superhero's origin. So you can be telling one Batman story where James Gordon has a different kind of history, depending on the Batman story you're telling here, and then another where James Gordon has a completely different other history as well. Depending on the iteration of Batman, depends on the iteration you're going to get of James Gordon. And that goes the same for Perry White. That goes the same for Lois Lane. Lois Lane doesn't really have a tethered to the ground history where you have to say Lois Lane is necessarily a white woman. Lois Lane could be an Asian woman, no problem. I mean, you could say, well, do Asians really have the surname Lane a lot? Well, yeah, sometimes they do have English surnames, so absolutely. So again, my point is this. I'm not saying you should be able to change any superhero, because I'm going to go into superheroes in a second and why they present a different problem. But certainly with supporting characters, you can't say these supporting characters that they started off white. It was 1939. We're living in racist times when black people were still fighting for the vote, when Asians were still migrating over to America and being treated like second-class citizens and war enemies and beaten up and whatever on the streets. When Jews were still living in ghettos. When all of these things were happening, right? Of course. When there were, in the 50s, you got to a point where there was the McCarthy trials, where they were putting creators and famous people on trial for being communist sympathizers. If they had have been making black and Asian and gay superheroes and characters in their comics, you best believe those McCarthy and FBI investigators would have been looking at them. It would have taken a huge amount of moxie and balls for some of these creators back in the day to really have presented anything except for white Caucasian characters. And since it is ethnic minorities as well as a big group of white people who have supported these characters for so many years, why won't you allow them to play in the sandbox if it's harmless, like James Gordon? That is absolutely harmless in being black. It's absolutely harmless Perry White being black. It's absolutely harmless Lois Lane being Asian. It's absolutely harmless I like Jimmy Olsen as Ginger. I don't know why, but Jimmy Olsen bothers me a little bit more. But even Jimmy Olsen, he doesn't have a history of his own. It could be made interesting if he's Asian or Indian or black or whatever. Yeah, an Indian James, an Indian, bloody hell, Jimmy Olsen could be interesting. Now, here's another one where I think there's a supporting character that is a little bit problematic, which is Wonder Woman's Steve Trevor. Now, Steve Trevor has been depicted black in the comics before, but one of the things I was going to say is, for me, a standard for whether you should be able to race swap or not is, does it change anything about the if you make them black, does anything, or Asian, does anything change about the character that fundamentally goes against the spirit of the character? And then secondly, can you actually improve the story a little bit by, or show a different side of the story by making them a different race? Now, you could say that probably about like a lot of characters, about can you show a different side? But I mean, I'll give you an example in Magneto a bit later of what I mean by, when you change the race, it can actually show a different dimension to the same story. But with certain characters, as I said, if you change their race, does it change the story that you're telling about that particular superhero? Now, one of the ones I think about when it comes down to this is Steve Trevor, in the Wonder Woman lore, right? She's Steve Trevor, the handy boyfriend, the secret, the army spy and pilot, he's existed in World War II, he's existed in the 80s, he's existed in modern times, modern iterations of him. Now, here's the thing, like the dynamic between Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor is that Steve Trevor actually is a representation in some way of man's world and its corruption, and why the Amazons have run away from man's world, right? Because men are corrupt. So in some way, Steve Trevor has to be a little bit of a punching bag for Diana at first to say, hey, men are this, and men are violent, and men are, and you conquer and you take over wars. And I remember one beautiful moment in the Wonder Woman movie, which I couldn't believe made it into the movie, was when the Native American character says to Diana, that all of his people are gone, and then she asks, who killed all your people? And he said, his people, pointing to Steve Trevor. And it's very, very poignant, and it's moments like that in Diana's journey that Steve Trevor presents to her as a man who is a good person, but at the same time appears to be everything that her mother and her society has told her is the image of the devil, of of men. They're bad, they're horrible. Now, does that change if the character is a person of color? Well, I think it does substantially change that particular relationship. Does it make it more interesting? Because now Steve Trevor, if you say black or Asian, can be seen as part of an oppressed class. So he can clap back at Diana and say, wait a second, don't tell me about being oppressed. You guys got to run away and live on your little paradise for thousands of years. I've been in the thick of it, being, my ancestors enslaved, killed, going through a civil rights movement, going through this. Don't you dare tell me that I'm a man and I'm part of the power structure, problem in the world. So I think that dynamic actually fundamentally changes with Steve Trevor, and therefore, in some ways, I would say that you can only do a black Steve Trevor where it's an Elseworld, and you're willing to address those issues, where Wonder Woman confronts him and says, look, men are this and men are bad and men are whatever, and they're violent and they're horrible and they cause wars. And he says, wait a second, man, you can't say that to me. You don't know what I've been through, right? That is an interesting dynamic that I think could be explored in an Elseworld or a film that, you know, like comes along after you've established what Steve Trevor is supposed to be. And then go on to a later film where you kind of explore a different dynamic with Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor. So that's my thing on supporting characters. I think for the most part, it really doesn't matter when you race bend, you know, supporting characters. But there are those rare few that obviously it does make a difference to the character dynamics if you change the race. Now, I want to go on to superheroes. Now, superheroes, I would say, very rarely is there a superhero where their race is actually really, really tied into their origin, and it can't be decoupled. So, for instance, you know, Green Lantern Hal Jordan, does he have to be white? No, not really. I know there is Jon Stewart, obviously, but again, he doesn't necessarily have to be white, even Hal Jordan. There's nothing tied to that character that necessitates that he have to be a white person. But they've already got Jon Stewart, and they've got plenty of Green Lanterns that are black and Muslim and all of that kind of stuff nowadays anyway. So that's good. You know, Shazam, Billy Batson, does he really have to be a little white kid? Not really. In fact, in some ways, like him being an orphan, being thrown around the foster system, could actually be more interesting if he was a little black kid. I mean, with his new Rainbow Coalition family that has been the new thing in Shazam comics, where he's got like one black sister and an Asian brother, and they all become the Shazam family, you kind of feel like it would be unnecessary to change Billy into a black kid now, because, you know, he's got all of his family now who kind of represent all the colors of the rainbow. But again, it doesn't necessitate, there's nothing in Shazam's DNA that says like that character has to be a white kid, right? He turns into Shazam, Captain Marvel. You know, you can go through and through and through with a number of different characters, including Supergirl, who I'll go on to after a segue into Superman, because Superman presents a very, very different issue. Now, Superman's the most complicated person to talk about race bending with. There's so many like good points by the other side where you go, well, he's an alien, so does he have to be, you know, those who are pro race bending Superman, you know, he can be any race. Who says the Kryptonians are white? Why are they even white people? It's already strange that that this far off planet has evolved and they look exactly like white people. Why is that in the first place? But like, since they have, why can't they have black people like, you know, Earth does? So why can't Superman be black? Now, I'd say this is where this standard comes in of, are we fundamentally changing the character, the roots of the character and the iconography of the character for us to be able to realistically change Superman or Clark Kent into a white person? Now, let's make clear, probably the reason Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster made Superman white, you know, kind of all American looking, rather than a Jewish kid from the Jewish ghetto, you know, where his shit turns up to some Jewish parents in the Jewish ghetto, is probably because they realized, like, you know, Jews wouldn't sell at that time. There was still a lot of anti-Semitism in 1939. People didn't want to go in America, didn't want to enter the fray of a new world war. and they felt like the Jews were, basically in the country were lobbying for America to save the Jews in Germany, which they rightly should have been doing. And America just didn't want to be part of that. They'd already joined in World War I, didn't want to go back into World War II. So there was a lot of anti-Semitism around at that time. So Superman being a classical white guy probably has a lot to do with that. That being said, his story is iconic. Now, can you make a Superman, for instance, that lands in the ghetto in America, like somewhere in the ghetto, or lands somewhere in Africa, and he's black? Sure, I think that's a good way. He can land in some farmers in Africa, and that's a great Elseworld story, right? But what's the problem with making Superman black, but keeping it the exact same story? So he lands in Smallville. There's this kindly couple, Ma and Pa Kent, who take care of him, teach him the greatest values of humanity, etc., etc. Why would it be problematic with him being white? Well, I did a little bit of research, a census into the Kansas population, and where is my Kansas population? Well, okay. For some reason I can't find it right now. I don't know why. Anyway, so the Kansas population of farmers is about 50-something thousand farmers in Kansas. You can double check this, but there's about 50,000 farmers or so in Kansas working right now with active farms. I'm sure, with everything that's been happening in the world recently and globalization and stuff like that, that the farming industry is much less than it was in Kansas amongst local small-time farmers. But there's about 50,000 remaining. Of those 50,000 farmers, only 210 from the last count were black. There were very few Asians, if any. And, it just, there was literally like about 200 and something that were black. So let's look at this statistically. We have a family in space sending their kid to a farm sending their kid to America, and he just so happens to. There's ones where they actually target the Kents, which I think is pretty stupid. I don't know, like how they would know that the Kents, exist. I don't even think it's sensible that they should know that. They should just know Earth is an inhabitable planet. I hate when they start talking about they know that human beings exist on the planet. They should just send him to a habitable planet and hope for the best. But usually they know at least that human beings exist on on Earth, right? And they've watched it for a while. But they send Clark sometimes purposefully to the actual Kents themselves, but sometimes most of the time they just send him, to Earth and hope for the best, knowing that human beings exist on this world and knowing that he's going to be strengthened by the sun. Now, statistically speaking, here's the thing about Superman, right? So he's sent from these parents billions of, millions of light years away, or hundreds of thousands of light years away, to Earth, right? And he just happens to land in Kansas, right? And this family of Jonathan and Martha Kent are well known in the community. And suddenly a baby turns up. And this baby, they have to somehow explain, like they fostered from their aunt, or you know, a sister of theirs, or something like that. They have to explain this fucking baby. Now, if this baby is black, they have a lot more explaining to do. Let's be realistic about it, right? Where did they get this black baby from? Did they just decide to adopt and they didn't tell anybody about it? And it's just like quick as that. Like, you know, you one day you apply, the next day you've got a little black kid. It's like there's a lot more explaining to be done than their classical answer, which is they can just say it's a family member's kid who, you know, passed away and they're looking after the kid now, right? So it becomes a much more organic story if the baby they find is also a white baby, right? You don't have to start explaining things to interrupt the story where Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent are explaining why they have this black child. A black child is going to stick out much, much more to that community than a white child. I'm not saying that a black child, if they had been talking about adopting a kid or anything like that with their neighbors, and then suddenly they have a black kid, then yeah, sure, then there's going to be no problem. No one in Kansas, I think, is going to start giving them grief about it. But if they just, one day they don't have a kid, next day they have a kid, that's weird already, right? And then you're going to have to explain the black thing. So that changes fundamentally the story. And that's what I mean. And it changes it in a way that it's kind of, it doesn't add anything, and it just makes for added extra complication. Now, you could say, well, what if you just make Jonathan and Martha Kent black? That's kind of weird even. I mean, maybe other people won't think of this, but I'll just be thinking in the audience, what is the likelihood in Kansas, of all places, of a black baby being sent millions of miles in space to Earth, lands in one of the whitest neighborhoods in the world, and ends up in one of the only black families in that neighborhood? That's pretty bizarre, like a coincidence. So that will take me out of the movie a bit. It won't completely remove me from the movie, but again, it's another hassle and quirk that is unnecessary in the Superman story. I think there's other aspects of Superman as well that make it that, you know, I think it's better him being white. It's more powerful as a character, as a representation of this particular type of character, that he is amongst, you know, a privileged class of people, or at least in terms of racially, they are the race who has, I suppose, the most power in the world, right? And yet he is somebody who cares about everyone no matter what. I think there's something actually a little bit powerful about that in and of itself, which is worth preserving in Superman, that he has no reason to identify with the little guy. You know, no inbuilt reason. Like if he's black and he's going through racism in Kansas and he's going through all of these hard times in Kansas, then there kind of becomes a reason other than the Kents raised him well, and their values and their view that all humanity has dignity, that leads him to treat everyone with dignity and save every last kid. And, you know, he doesn't care if the kid's black or white or Asian or whatever. He'll fly in and do everything he possibly can to save them and help them. And, you know, all of those kind of things. He has to be somebody who has no other reason other than how Jonathan and Martha Kent raised him to view that. Not that he's actually felt oppression and whatever himself, and now he's like, oh, well, since I felt it, I'm going to now go out and save people. That's the thing I think about Superman. And I even think that a little bit about Captain America as well. Because Captain America, there's no reason for him to be white other than that scene, you know, where, you know, in Endgame, where he's talking to the gay guy, right? And he's supposed to represent everything American, everything fair and just and best in American. And he's able to speak with a gay man about his lost love and see him as somebody worthy and whatever. There's a slight power in that. But beyond that, I think with Superman, you know, the essence of the character, there is some certain aspects of him that just make him fundamentally white. I think, in terms of the logistics of him, of maintaining the origin of him landing in Kansas, being met by this Kansas family, and etc. etc. That being said, if you want to do an Elseworld where Superman lands in the ghetto and he's black, and how that would change Superman, how that would change Clark Kent if he lived and experienced those things, I think that's a wonderful idea. I think it's wonderful to do Superman stories where he lands in Russia, where he lands in other historical periods. I think that those are great stories to tell about Superman. And that's the power and universality of the character. But I think you have to get the central character right, especially in movies. You have to get that character fundamentally right for you to explore all these different other territories of what you can do with Superman by making Asian Superman and Black Superman and Superman who landed in Soviet Russia, or Superman who landed in Nazi Germany. You have to get the ideal first before that has the impact. So last things last, we're going to talk about villains. Now, villains fall into, for me, into the same category as supporting characters. Villains often don't have origin stories outside of the hero that they go up against. So Brainiac, for instance, in the Superman lore, has various different origin stories. He has origin stories that where he is from Krypton. He has origin stories where he's from Cthulhu. He has various different origin stories, and it really depends on the Superman story you're telling, what Brainiac you're actually going to get, so it's the same with Lex Luthor. Sometimes Lex Luthor knows him from Smallville. Sometimes Lex Luthor is just the business guy who existed in he's always a businessman. He's always super intelligent. He's always very scientific. But apart from that, it's up in the air. Did he get his money from his family? Did he make his money on his own? All of those things are up in the air about Lex Luthor, depending on the Superman story that you're actually telling. So that being said, villains are very much in the same position. Catwoman, Poison Ivy, even the Joker. The Joker doesn't have to be white. There's nothing saying he has to be white. Nothing essential to that character. He's a clown that likes to cause chaos, that laughs at you lot, and he's a sadistic psychopath or whatever, right? A black person can play that. An Asian person can play that. Sometimes he doesn't even have a name or history. He's a complete mystery where he comes from. So of course, Joker can be black or Asian or anything. And there should be no problem with race bending him. It's about coming up with rules for race bending where it makes sense and where it doesn't. And I think that's the important thing, a message that I want to send in this video. And with supervillains and supporting characters, really, it's up in the air. There's no thing that you can say stops you from saying this character is fundamentally somebody of color when they're a villain, like the Penguin. Penguin doesn't have a history necessarily. Sometimes he comes from a rich aristocratic family. Sometimes he's just a gangster who's made it, living on the streets and made it to the top. That can be a black guy. Kingpin can be a black guy. Ares, God of War, can be any character that is in, most villains in superhero mythos. Riddler, same thing. Most villains in superhero mythos are completely beholden to the origin stories or the stories that the comic book character is that they're telling of the comic book character at that time. Right. So you have a different Joker in The Dark Knight Returns. You have a different Joker in, Brian Azzarello's Joker. You have a different Joker in the Joker movie. There's so many different variations, and that's the same with all villains. People think that that's only the Joker, but that's the same with basically all comic book villains. Same with, the Riddler. Riddler doesn't have any like particular origin story. So anyway, there are some, wrinkles in this, So for instance, I would say I would much more buy a black or Asian Magneto than I would, a Professor X. Why do I say that? Well, Professor X is actually, he could be black. I really do think so. The more I think about Professor X, the more I think the only thing tying him racially to being white would be something that would be a racist assumption on my part, which is like he comes from a wealthy family. Now, a black person can come from a wealthy family. I don't think generations long wealthy family, but at least that he could have come from a well-to-do family from Africa, something like that, like a privileged family from Africa who traveled to the States. And he's well educated and whatever, and the same with from an Asian family with that kind of thing. It's different with someone like Batman, where he's stuck in Gotham, right? And you have to have a family that's made their money for generations long in Gotham City itself, and then you're like, really, if you're talking about like, this is a family like that's been maybe rich since like the 19th century or something like that. Like really generations and generations of the Wayne family have been rich. Don't think it's going to be a black guy. Don't think it's going to be an Asian guy in Gotham City, right? So that's different. Whereas Charles Xavier, there's a little bit more wriggle room there. But certainly with Magneto, I think here's an example. And the reason I use him is where you've actually got a very, very good reason to give an opportunity to somebody else rather than a white Caucasian actor to play this role. Why do I say that? I say that because Magneto is, and please do like, subscribe if you're enjoying this discussion. The reason I say that is Magneto is tied to the Holocaust. He's a Holocaust survivor, right? But it's not essential that he has to be a Holocaust survivor. What he has to do in Magneto law is to come from a situation where his view of humanity is fundamentally changed to a much more dark and cynical one, where if you don't take, if the powerful rule and destroy those who are weaker than them. So he has to believe that. So he has to believe, therefore, if mutants are superior and human beings are struggling and fighting against them, the only way to overcome them is to destroy them. The Holocaust isn't the only situation in human history that could have given him the perception of a perception of the world like that. The civil rights movement might have given him a perception of the world like that. And you could have another interesting dynamic between Charles and Magneto in that sense, right? Or it could have been, the genocide that happened in Freetown in Africa. Where am I thinking of? In Rwanda in Africa in the 90s. Or it could be some conflict that happened in Asia, or a conflict that happened, between Pakistan and India, right? It could be any of those things that gives Magneto that world view, and you give an opportunity for another actor to bring another dimension to Magneto that we haven't seen before. Now, I want to finish with something a little bit lighthearted, because that's my opinion. I think superheroes, race bending in general. Oh, I wanted to talk about very, very briefly about Hawkman, because Hawkman's a really interesting one, because he's much like Magneto. It's like you actually get a chance to tell a different side of Magneto, by changing the race, and it can be interesting, and it can update it, and it can get you out of that situation where you're like, well, the Holocaust is a long time ago now, guys. If you want Magneto to be anything less than 90 years old, maybe we need to update what conflict changed his mind, right? To have this kind of worldview. So with Hawkman, you have a similar thing. He started off white, but all of his roots are from the character. This was the Hawkman, and this is one where you think, well, would the creator of Hawkman actually have changed it in 1940 if he had the ability to, and didn't wasn't worried about like what people would think if he had a black or an Egyptian looking actor, an Egyptian looking character as a superhero. But his roots, this Hawkman, was Carter Hall, and he's a reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian prince, Khufu. Right? Sounds very ethnic to me already, right? And he becomes an archaeologist and goes to a museum and does all of this kind of stuff. Now, I don't mind him being white, but why not give like an Egyptian actor or a Middle Eastern actor, or maybe a black actor, but more Middle Eastern or something like that, a chance to be a superhero? Here's a great chance where you can race bend, and it completely makes sense to the mythology. He's from ancient Egypt. It actually makes it tightens up the mythology of something that couldn't have been changed in the time period that it did. So that's the last thing I wanted to say about that. And I was gonna just finish off with a little fun point of what the world is with every ginger comic book character being race bent. They always race bend the ginger ones. Can somebody tell me, like, I've never understood it. You've got here, you've got Cyclone recently been bent. You have who's Hawk Girl recently race bent. Iris West was race bent twice for the movie as well as the film. Iris West, and for me, of all the white people you shouldn't race bend, it's kind of actually ginger people, because I feel like being ginger does have something to do with your character. I don't know why, but like I just feel like there's something fun about having looking at ginger people in movies. But anyway. So Jimmy Olsen, it's like a trend in Hollywood. I don't know what that is. Do they notice it themselves? Starfire kind of looks, she's dark anyway. You could say maybe Brazilian. So her being race wasn't really particular. She's orange. Well, recent kind of different because, all kind of was originally cast left the show. Was April O'Neil race bent? I didn't know that. But yeah, it's like, and Jim Gordon himself. So yeah, that's my kind of discussion of race bending within comics. Tell me think about, is the recent. I mean, characters are necessarily like, Ariel. The Little Mermaid actually really makes sense to me because the whole thing is set in the Caribbean, so it would make sense to me that Ariel would be a Caribbean princess. But anyway, as far as it goes, what I'm saying is I don't agree with bending, but I think the hard line on race bending is a bit kind of weird, and I don't know what the motivation is behind it. What makes people so uncomfortable? I'll be right there with you. If they race bend James Bond, or they race bend Superman, or they race, without setting up, that this is an Elseworld or something like that, then I'll be right there with you. But for the most part, supporting characters, there's a reason why these characters were this race very early on, and a lot of it was kind of for racist reasons. So if you want to support those racist reasons that they were, in previous, 1939 and etc., why they were all white, then, by all means you can support that. But I think in general, certain characters, Superman can't, you can't have him as black in main continuity or Asian in main continuity. It doesn't make sense to his origin. It struggles against his origin. But more often than not, supporting characters and the villains just don't have an actual race. They don't. Like, in terms of the essence of the character, nothing changes about Catwoman by making her black, as in making her white or making her Asian. Nothing changes. Asian might actually be interesting because, like, you could add some kind of ninja roots into her character and why she knows all the martial arts and stuff. So that might actually make a little bit more sense. But apart from that, there's no real changing. There's no real change in the character. Lois Lane, no real change in the character. You make her whatever race. But Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, you can race bend, actually, I think. But a lot of those kind of characters, that's where you find there's rooted within their story something that makes them actually, it makes more sense than being white, and it would take a leap of imagination. I'll give you a great example, Fantastic Four, for instance. And please do comment in the comment section if you know, or if you want to talk to me. But in the Fantastic Four, you had Johnny Storm being black and his sister white, and it was like everyone was asking, oh, why is that? And they were like, oh, what's the problem? You can have black and white sisters. And it's just like, yeah, but you just want a kind of explanation when you see it, right? There's a little explanation. And it's like, when you have to give those explanations, that's when I think you run into like trouble, where it's like, either you're going to give the explanation, it's going to be a good one, or you're going to give a shitty explanation and it's going to take me out of the movie for 10, 15 minutes, where I'm looking at this thinking, this doesn't reign true to me as a true human dynamic. Anyway, that's me. Thanks very much. Please give me a high five, smash the like button, like and subscribe. I'm going to cut this, I think, into 2, maybe even 3 sections. But thanks so much for all those who've been supporting my channel recently. And do smash the like button, give me a high five, and have a nice Saturday. I'm outie. Oh, and comment. Tell me what you think about race bending in comics. If you agree or disagree with it.